this morning, can I just say that we're so excited about the vision that God has given to us as Life Church and also to Life Child. And I think the reason why it excites us is because we actually can't accomplish this grand vision without all of us doing it together. And so we're excited for this year, and we're excited that we're able to be a part of it. This month, we've been going through our Vision Month, and as you all know, this is our theme for the whole year. But today we're going to be focusing on lengthen your cords. Everyone say lengthen your cords. And Isaiah 54 verse 2, and by this point you should probably just nod off by heart. Anyone nod off by heart? But let's read it together. Enlarge the place of your tent, stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes. Last week, Pastor Anthony spoke on strengthening your stakes. And the reality is, in order for us to enlarge, to stretch, and to lengthen, it requires a strengthening of your stakes, of your foundation. If you don't have strong roots, you won't have a strong tree. You need strong foundations in order to have a strong building. And what God's wanting to do with us, He's wanting to expand us, but if our foundations aren't strong, it won't be able to handle the expansion. But this morning, the title of the message is For Heaven's Sake. I want everyone to say it, for heaven's sake. I'll get to that in a moment. But when you look at the story of Israel at this point, of God's people, and where they were at the time, God's people were in a season of barrenness and unfruitfulness. And they were in a season whereby God was prophesying to them their release from Babylon and their return and what would come of their multiplication. And this was at a time that was to come, but God was saying to them, I want you to get ready and make room for the growth. But like Scripture often talks about a present moment, but also prophesying to the future. And so this verse also speaks to the future when in Acts, Jesus would establish the local church. And he was saying to the local church, even to the Jewish people, I want you to lengthen and stretch to make room for the Gentiles that were going to come in. And he was saying to them, I want you to take my word, my gospel, to the very ends of the earth. But his people had to what? Make room for who was going to come under. When you think of a tent, the cords are needed to fasten the tent covering to the tent pegs or the stakes in the ground. And to lengthen those cords is to extend the reach, increase the boundary, take more ground, reach further, enlarging the space under the tent covering. In Acts, the gospel spread, and it says in Acts that thousands were added daily. No wonder God was calling them to make room, because I'm about to add. And what he said to them back then is the same to us. God is wanting us to prepare to make room so that he can add, so that he can enlarge. He had said to them, go into all the world. He didn't say just go to the small part, the pastor's closest to you. He was saying to go into all the world, which applies to us today. When you look at the picture of a tent, this is not a perfect tent, but this is similar to what it might have looked like in that day. And we're talking in this year, and especially in this month, about enlarging the place of our tent. And obviously that applies to us as a church, as a local church, that we collectively have a vision of expanding our place, our area of influence. But because you and I are the church, it applies to you very personally. It applies to me very personally with my family, with my place of influence, your place of influence, your circle of friends, your ministry, your community, your cell group. Just like God was calling his people to lengthen their cords, he's giving the same challenge to you and I today, to lengthen our reach. When you look at what God was saying to his people at the time, he was sort of prophesying a few things, but two specific things. One, their restoration and their freedom. He was saying, although you are barren now, I am prophesying to you, I'm telling you of the time that you will be fruitful. You will expand. There's going to come a time where you will no longer be barren, but you will be fruitful. I'm going to give you more land. I'm going to give you more territory. So it was restoration and freedom, and second was their fruitfulness. So in verse 1, and we've spoken about this for the last few weeks, in verse 1 it says, sing, O barren woman. He was acknowledging their state of barrenness, but he's saying, sing in your barrenness because you will have not just one child, but greater are your children. You're going to have many children. And verse 2 was saying, okay, once you acknowledge your barrenness, that's where you are now, but I'm going to create increase in your life. He was calling the people to expand, to make room for those children that were going to come in. But then verse 3 is quite amazing. Because if you think about expanding, okay, if you think of a woman who's about to have a child, what is she doing before the child comes into the home? What is she doing? Making room, making sure she's got everything that she needs. Is her house big enough? Is her car big enough? Does she have the money to take care of this child? Does she have the resources to take care of the child, right? There is a reason for that time period, because she is preparing. But then in verse 3 it says the why. So 2, you need to expand and stretch and lengthen. And then verse 3 says this, for you will spread out to the right and to the left. Your descendants will dispossess nations and settle in their desolate cities. So he's saying to them, yes, I'm going to restore you. I'm going to set you free. But I need you to extend so that those who will come under my banner, those people who are going to come under my covering, will also receive what I'm promising to you. And sometimes it's easy just to be happy and content with what we have, what God's given to us. And God was saying to his people, yes, you are my people. You are my people whom I love, and my grace is on you. But I want you to extend, to lengthen your reach to welcome others in. Matthew 28 he said to them, I'm sending you out into all the world, to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And they could have been very comfortable in Judea because they had Jesus, had seen him, he was right there with them. And Jesus saying, no, it's not enough to just stay where you are. I actually want to bring other people into the family, but in order to bring other people in, it's going to require you to get a bit bigger. It's going to require you to lengthen and to be able to make room. And what I love about the way this is worded is that it really wasn't a suggestion. He wasn't saying, like, if you would like to grow, or if you feel like this is your season for expansion, then expand. He was saying, you must expand. You must. This is a command. I'm commanding you to enlarge the place of your tent. I'm commanding you to stretch your curtains wide. I'm commanding you to lengthen. I'm commanding you to strengthen. Why? Because there are names and faces on the other side of that obedience. It's not about us just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and expanding for the sake of saying we're growing and because we love growth. God is saying there are people on the other side, and he's calling us to be a part of it. And I realize for me, the challenge is as much for me. Because once we've received our freedom, it's very easy to settle in that freedom. It's very easy to be comfortable with what we've received. And we could just camp in verse 1 and 2. We could just camp there, like God's promising fruitfulness, and no longer am I going to be barren, and that's awesome. And we're going to enlarge, we're going to stretch, and we could just stay there. And God's like, doesn't stop in verse 2. Verse 3 says, the reason why is so that you will spread out to the right and the left. And get this, your descendants will dispossess nations and settle in their desolate cities. Those that you make room for, those people that you are lengthening for that will come under the tent, they're the ones that are going to take over nations and cities. And I realize for me, maybe I won't be the one to do all that God's called, but the people that I make room for, God's going to use to take over nations. I think of Mozambique and Malawi and Zimbabwe and South Africa. I think of the children that we have. Who's to say what God's going to use them for? But if we haven't made room for them, they won't be the ones to dispossess nations and settle in desolate cities. But we won't always see the fruit. And I think that's the tough thing. Sometimes we wonder, well, what's the impact that I'm really making? But our job is not to determine the impact. Our job is to do what God's called us to do. Cities and nations are resting on the balance of what we are called to do. When you look at this picture, this is an example. I mean, obviously there was many seasons of God's people traveling, but this was one example of what people suggest it could have looked like. But these are individual tents, families, extended families, and in their place of their tent. But what they would do is they would place those tents beside each other, and that circle goes all the way to the top, and it creates this wall of protection. So that as each one expanded their place of their tent, one by one beside each other created this wall of protection. And it was a wall from enemies. Their cattle and livestock could be in the middle. So it wasn't just about individuals living their own life. It was that together, when everyone took their place, God did an amazing thing. And when I looked at this, it wasn't just a place of like living in their tents, but it was a space of protection and of provision. And I went back and I just researched like what happened in the tent back then, because it wasn't like there was loads of other buildings, but everything happened in the tent. It was such a focal part of their community. So mediation happened in the tent. Meetings happened in the tent. Food was given in the tent. Shelter, protection, belonging, security. It all happened in the tent. And God was telling them to expand, to lengthen their tent so that more of that could happen. And when I think of our church, and especially Life Child today, this is exactly what we are called to do. To execute justice, to provide a place of belonging, protection, safety, food, shelter, to defend those in need, and to welcome in the stranger. And again, it's not an option. Jesus said, "You're my plan A." The local church is my plan A. You and I sit here today because people back then decided to go into all the world. We don't sit here because we made it here. I sit here because I had parents who shared the gospel with me, and their parents shared the gospel with them, and their parents shared the gospel with them. I could track it back. Maybe you're sitting here is because a friend brought you. Life Child exists to reach orphan and vulnerable children and restore communities for generational change, one life at a time. And you know, sometimes we look at this grand vision, right? And it's a great vision. It's great. But if I'm to be honest with you, do we always have all that we need to do all that God has given us the vision to do? No. It's always a serious stretch. And it would be much easier not to, if I'm honest. When we look at a goal of R1 million for food, it would be much easier not to have that burden on our shoulders, right? Much easier. But then you know who is on the other side of that R1 million? Is all those children in Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. So that's the choice that we have, because there are children on the other side of the stretch. I thought of just one of the girls. I mean, we could give stories for days, but Amila was one of the girls in our Life Child preschool. And we give the children an opportunity always to know about Jesus, to hear about Jesus, but also then to respond and give their hearts to Jesus. And the preschool was given that opportunity. And very strongly, Amila said, "I don't want to do it now." And teacher's like, "That's fine. You don't have to do it now. It's fine." She's like, "I want to do it at home. I first want to have a bath, and then I want to get ready, and then I want to do it at home." Cheers. Good for you. But the point was, she had such a conviction. And the thing is, I still see Amila. She still comes back to visit. She's in primary school, and she's thriving in primary school. She came back, she said, "I'm doing my homework, and I'm doing it all." But her mother, I just want to say, her mother's the one that comes back and says, "I'm so grateful to God." And do you know, often the testimony that comes from the parents is not, "I'm grateful for Life Child." Although they are. They actually come back and they say, "I'm grateful to God of what God has done for my family." I look at Mozambique, if you want to look at, put the photos up there. When I had that picture of the tents in a circle, it just made me think of this picture in Mozambique of the homes. Like practically that's what we're doing. Like tangibly making room, lengthening our cords, creating homes, creating space for more children to come under. In South Africa, I think of our Life Child Centre, our emergency safety home, our preschool. We've just purchased another foster home. Why? Because we want to create room for more children. In Malawi, I think of our preschool and our land and the ECD centre that will be built. Zimbabwe, I think of Edson and Talent, who were sitting in these seats. They sat here and they felt the call of God to say, "You know what? We're going to lengthen. We're going to go back to Zim, and we're going to trust God for an increase." And look what God's doing there. But as a church, we could very easily shrink, because it's easy to shrink, right? The nature of humankind is, if you didn't have to get up in the morning and go to work, what would you do? Probably not get up and go to work. And the nature of us is sometimes naturally to shrink and to pull back. But the Bible says the world of the generous grows larger and larger, but the world of the stingy grows smaller and smaller. There's an amazing verse in Jeremiah 22, verse 16. And it says this: "He defended the cause of the afflicted and the needy. Then all was well." Everyone say, "Then all was well." Is that not what it means to know me, says the Lord? God's like just taking out all the confusion, all the fluff, and saying, defending the cause of the afflicted and the needy. That's what it means to know me. And I think it's not an accident that it says, then all was well. Because it cannot be all well when the afflicted and the needy are not taken care of. So we can't say all is well. Don't we tend to say that someone, how are you doing? All's well. Well, it's not all well when we have the opportunity to do more. I want to tell you a story. I'm getting a bit serious here, so I'm going to lighten the mood. Okay, you want to hear a story? Not that you have a choice. Okay, it's a very serious story. It's a very spiritual story. It won't sound like it when I get started, but bear with me, I am going somewhere. So 6 months ago, or so, maybe even longer, my children, they're 9 years old, they have been asking me for bunnies, like actual bunnies with, bunny tail and rabbit ears, those kinds of things, right? Real bunnies. And I'm like, I don't see the need, right? They're like, Mummy, can we please have bunnies? And as every good parent does, you just distract them with distraction, right? So you're like, oh, we'll see, we'll think about it, maybe later, just trying to make sure the phase will pass. Well, the phase never passed. And they were like, Mummy, please, 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 can we have it? And then I said, listen, mummies, we can't have bunnies in an apartment. It just doesn't work. You need outdoors. Trying to give a reason, right? And they're like, no, it's okay, Mummy, it's fine. We don't need bunnies. We could have guinea pigs. I'm like, no, you're not getting the point. We're not having guinea pigs. We're inside a flat, okay, in an apartment. And they're like, Mummy, it's totally okay. And I can see the two of them, they go off and they have their own little convention over here, this little meeting. And they come back and they're like, Mum, we've got the solution. I'm like, what is it? Hamsters. I'm like, no, my baby, listen, it's getting to a point where I'm actually just going to say no now. And they're like, Mummy, okay, not a hamster, it's fine, but a dwarf hamster. My baby, really, you're killing me here. They're like, okay, no, it's fine. A teddy hamster. I'm like, what are all these versions of hamsters? So they carried on and carried on and carried on. And so I just felt really proud of myself that I just one day said no. Shattered their hearts, shattered their dreams, and I just said no. They're like, oh, wow, Mum. I'm so sorry, my baby. We're just going to say no. Just let that linger. Well, fast forward to December, and we were in the US, and I was traveling for Life Child and preaching and making new connections with people for Life Child partnerships and sponsorships. And throughout the whole trip, there was this one word that God kept bringing to me. And it became quite relentless, and it caught my attention, but everywhere I went, so books that I was given, preachers were preaching about it, my devotions, conversations, and this one word that was repeated over and over again was the word favor. And because it was happening so often, I started to get a little bit frustrated with it. I'm like, why? What's the issue here? Why is this so being repeated? And I realized that I had a bit of an aversion to the word favor. And I asked God why, and I realized it's because the word favor has been abused and misconstrued for what it is not. About me and what I can get and my world and this whole me focus. And yet for some reason God was highlighting it in quite a dramatic way, this word of favor. And so I didn't quite understand. I said, God, you're going to have to make it a bit clearer. And so I actually went to research, and I'm like, I actually want to know what this word means. And so I went to the Hebrew because there's just so much depth, deeper than sometimes what the English will say. And so when I researched the word for favor, the word in Hebrew is chanan, which actually means to bend or to stoop in kindness, to favor, bestow, beseech, be gracious, be merciful, or to have mercy on. And when I read that, I was a little wowed. I'm like, I don't understand. The God of the universe, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, is wanting to bend or stoop to me in kindness. And I'm like, who am I that God would in that way humble himself because he's trying to get my attention, because he's trying to show me kindness? And in a weird way, I was almost doing this to him. He's like, why will you not just receive my kindness? He's like, I'm trying to lavish my kindness on you. I want to show you my kindness because I love you, and this is just who I am. And so I came home with this renewed sense of wow, God just is so kind. He's just so kind. And maybe for you, you haven't seen God as a kind God. Maybe you've been hurt or disappointed, but I just want to say to you this morning that he is kind. He's a kind, good Father. So we came back from our trip, and as that happens, you got back into the routine, and the girls started school. It was busy, busy, busy. And their question continued. Mummy, we said we don't want bunnies. That's okay, but we really want hamsters. I said, girls, go to school. We'll talk about this later. Well, one day they were at school. I thought, you know what, let me just go research, right? Let me just do my research. So I went to the pet store, and I walked in, and I said to the gentleman, hello, sir, do you have any dwarf hamsters? He said, I'm so sorry, ma'am. We don't have any dwarf hamsters. I'm like, yes. And then he said, I said, do you have any teddy hamsters? He's like, no, sorry, ma'am. We don't have any teddy hamsters. I'm like, yes. And then I said, do you have any kind of hamster whatsoever? He's like, I'm so sorry, ma'am. We're not sure why, but there's none in the wider Cape Town area. I'm like, praise the Lord, I've been saved. I'm like, this is the favor of God. I am walking in the favor of God because I have been saved. And I was just like walking. I was like, God, you are on my side here. You are advocating for me. As I walk past the snakes and all the other animals, we get to this enclosure, and I look over, and there was about 15 pure white with grey ears, bunnies. Very cute. Fluffy, cute, 3 months old. I'm like, wow, they are really cute. Dang it. Like, I can see why my girls really want bunnies. And the guy was there, so I was asking lots of questions. Right? Oh, like, what would you need, and this and that, and how much do they cost, and, doing all the way up. But in my head, I'm thinking, well, we're obviously not buying bunnies, but I'm just making conversation, right? So he walks off, and I'm just standing there, just looking at the bunnies. Oh, very cute. Well, at least I don't have to buy bunnies. I'm standing there, and it just seems like the time just slowed down a little bit. And then as clear as I can repeat it now, I felt the Lord impress upon me a question. Beck, it's always nervous when he starts with your name. Beck, just in case I was thinking it was someone else. Why would you withhold kindness when it is in your power to do so? I'm like, you've got to be kidding. They're bunnies. It's not salvation to the ends of the earth kind of. These are bunnies. And as calmly as I feel like the Lord said, Beck, why would you withhold kindness from your children when it is in your power to do so? So if you can put the photo up. So this is my first set of twins, Butle and Okutle, and this is my next set of twins, Bella and Ella, who are the result of a few minutes later, I had no choice. And as you can imagine, I came home and brought my children in blindfolded. They had no idea what I'm doing. And I said, girls, just sit here. And I had the cage there and bunnies in the cage. And I said, okay, girls, you can open up your blindfolds. Well, I should have shown that video because that's amazing. They were blown away. Absolutely blown away because their expectation was so low. I had destroyed all sense of expectation, which maybe was a good thing. But then when I provided their dream, they were like over the moon. They're like, Mummy, you're the best mummy on the planet. I'm like, I know. I am the best mummy on the planet. The price that takes to like bless your children. So I did. I brought them home, and we have bunnies in our home. But what happened is I realized that it actually has nothing to do with the bunnies. I still have to keep them, but it has nothing to do with the bunnies. Richard Chapman, after the first service, sent me a message and was like, a screenshot from Wikipedia saying that bunnies they live for 12 years. I'm like, thanks, Richard. I hadn't done that deeper research. Anyway, but I realized it wasn't about the bunnies. And I know it seems like silly, but God usually speaks to me in very everyday, normal situations. God was saying, just as you've received my favor and my kindness, I want you to now lavishly show kindness and my favor to those around you. And sometimes we think God only cares about the big things, but God cares about the little things. And I think he wanted to show me that just like he cares about the big and the little for me, I need to care about the big and the little for those around me. And it might have seemed like it's just a bunny for my children, But I felt like God said, but that's how I care for you. I care about the little things. And I lavish my kindness on you. So if you have the power to be kind, like radically kind to your children, then be kind. What probably surprised me more was that the way the question was worded. It wasn't, why, when you can be generous, be generous. No, he worded it, why would you withhold kindness when it's in your power to do so? So actually my choice to buy the bunnies or not buy the bunnies was basically whether I was choosing to be stingy and withhold kindness. And I'm like, I got nowhere to go. I'm either going to choose to be stingy or I'm going to be kind. The next day I was buying groceries. You know where this is going to go. I was buying groceries and there was a very unhappy, very, very, very difficult woman in front of me. Very difficult. Very difficult. And then again, watching her be difficult, I was sort of judging her for being so difficult, subconsciously. I felt like the Lord say to me, okay, Beck, show her kindness. Display my favor. Buy her groceries. I'm like, dang it. Really? Her? What about the nice person behind me? No, her. Like, show her kindness. You know why? It's because she's going to be shocked that you're going to be so kind. And when I paid for her groceries, she was shocked. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I just would love to show you kindness and buy your groceries. That's just what was in my heart. It's just welling up. And she's like, no, you can't. I'm like, yes, I really can, and I really want to. She walked away back. She was just like, what? Like, who? Okay. And then she spoke to her friend who was with her and told her, and then they were just so confused. But as she left, I was like, I just really want to, and, God bless you. And she walked off. A few days later, I was in Pick n Pay. And I'm lining up, and there's a boy in front of me. He's about probably 9 or 10. And he had 1 pack of chicken. And the same thing, I felt like God said, just show my favor. Show kindness. Buy the chicken. And I said to the boy, like, hey, buddy, can I buy your chicken? I mean, you keep it, but like, can I buy the chicken for you? He's like, no, ma'am, it's really fine. It's really fine. I'll buy the chicken. I'm like, no, can I please buy your chicken? He's like, oh, really? But I've got the money. I'm like, no, I know you can. I know you can buy it, but like, I would just like to buy it for you. And he was like, okay, sure. And he walks off, and then he goes back. He says, sorry, can I have the receipt? They're going to think I'm stealing it. I'm like, good call. Can you print him a receipt so he can take it? But the point is that God was saying to me, and I tell you that not because it was any huge expense, it wasn't expensive, but the point was God was saying, like, I poured out my kindness on you, and I want you to walk around pouring out my kindness. Like, extravagantly pour it out. And then look what I read this week as I'm preparing for this message. Proverbs 3 verse 27 says this: do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. These are holy bunnies that God would speak to me through the bunny. Do not withhold good. God was saying to me, do not withhold good when you have it in your power to do it. When you come back to Isaiah 54, a few verses later, verse 10, it says, for though the mountains should depart and the hills shall be shaken or removed, yet my love and my kindness shall not depart from you. And I was obviously researching this whole thing about tents and going quite deep. I like to know the meaning and what it all means. And as I had researched the word for favor and kindness, which is chanan, C-H-A-N-A-N, I found another word, chana, C-H-A-N-A-H, and look at what the meaning is. It's to incline, to pitch a tent, to encamp, to abide in tents, to camp, dwell, grow to an end, lie, rest in a tent. But look at what the primitive root word behind this word is, chanan. It's the same word used in different situations. And as I researched it, a Hebrew scholar had said that often how they refer to the camp, the circle of all their tents together, the camp, they would use this word. And I was blown away. It was as if his people were saying, when you come into my camp, you're going to come into his kindness. You're going to come into his favor. That when you come into the camp, our camp, where we reside in our place of influence, you're going to find kindness. You're going to find rest. And the fact that they would almost interchange those words is no accident why God was impressing this word favor on me, kindness upon me. Because he wants us as the church to extend, to lengthen our cords. Why? To invite people into the kindness of God. And I believe so many people have been hurt by the church. They have this wrong perception of who God is. And it's almost like my children had such a low expectation. And I wonder if there are people in your world that have such a low expectation of God. They've got such a low view of the church that when we come with extravagant kindness, they have no other reason but to decide or conclude that it must be the goodness of God. Imagine if that was the reaction of people. They're like, why are you being so kind? Because it's not normal for the church to be so kind. God wanted his people to be the living example of his kindness and favor. Wherever their group of tents went, it was like the kindness of God traveled through the desert, through the wilderness. It was like my kindness is traveling through the desert. My grace, my favor is traveling. And jump forward to today. He wants us, the church, you and I, to be the living and tangible example of his kindness. So when we talk about the enlarging of the tent was a tangible invitation to others to find rest and shelter in the kindness and the goodness of God. I wonder if that's how people see us as the church. I read this quote which sort of struck the chord with me. It says, when you have more than you need, build a longer table, not a higher fence. This is what you and I have been invited to do, to bring people face to face with the favor of God. That when we lavish kindness on those around us, that the prayer is that they would conclude that it must only be God, because this is not normal. What if when people came into this house, they found radical kindness? What if when people came into your house, they found radical kindness? What if when you went into your community, your workplace, they found radical kindness? What if when you went next door, your neighbors found kindness? And I wonder if sometimes we have the wrong perception that God is an angry, serious, demeaning, overpowering kind of God, that he just wants to break you and work you to the bone. And for sure, there is a call to lay down our lives, to take up our cross and follow him, for sure. But what if it was that God was also wanting to make room for more joy, more freedom, more peace, so that when you lengthen and make room for others, when they come in, they would experience the same joy and freedom that you first have received. 2 Corinthians 5:1, the worship team can come up. For we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For indeed in this house we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven. The reality is there is coming a day when this earthly tent that we're living in will pass away. People will come face to face with God. And my prayer is that as they come face to face with God, they will find favor with God because they know him and because he knows them. And we have that opportunity while we still have breath in our lungs to know and to make known our relationship with God. And we're going to close the service in a moment, but before we even go there, I want everyone to bow your heads for a moment, and I want to give people the opportunity, their hearts to Jesus. And you might be sitting here and be thinking, you know what, I've looked on from afar. I've known of the tent, I've known of his presence, but I've not yet entered in. I've not yet made it personal. I've not yet put the stake in the ground of my decision to follow him. And so I want to pray a prayer, and if this is you, if you've never received Jesus, I'm going to pray, and I want you to pray this in your heart after me. Lord Jesus, thank you for your kindness to me. Thank you that your kindness led you to the cross. That you hung on that cross and took my sin, my shame, so that I could be forgiven and set free. Jesus, today, would you forgive me? Would you wash me clean? Would you make me a new creation, that I might follow after you, that I might live for you, that I might be your hands and feet, to take kindness to those around me. Lord Jesus, I thank you that from this day forward, I am yours and you are mine. With every head bowed, if that was you this morning, if you prayed that for the first time with every head bowed, would you just raise up your hand and we're just going to celebrate with you? If that was you, just raise up your hand. Awesome. I see that hand. Awesome.